Hello, everybody. This is TK Kugler from Wasabi Ventures Stables, and it is great to have you here with us tonight. I think we have a really fun and interesting webinar tonight. We've got two guests, and both of these guests are club members at Wasabi Ventures Stables, but more importantly, in both cases, they're both horse owners, both inside of Wasabi Ventures and outside of Wasabi Ventures, I believe. And both of them have lived the experience of being a club member, being a graduate, meaning they own 20%, but sort of in partnership with Wasabi Venture Stables, and being a full owner, or at least definitely in Jeff's case, being a full owner and being on the full freight of what that means. And we're going to talk about all of that tonight. And if you have any questions, this is going to be very Oprah style. I'm not giving away cars, but it's going to feel very Oprah style tonight. I'm just going to ask questions of both Thomas and Jeff, and it'll feel very much like hopefully like Oprah without the couches and the cars. And but if you have any questions, use the chat function at the bottom. Just go ahead and ask questions, and I will work those in. But I want to kick this off, and I'll start off with a question for you, Jeff. Sure. Jeff, and I just want to give like 30 seconds beforehand. I'll do this on both Thomas and Jeff. But in Jeff's case, Jeff and I met because of horses. And, now we work together on other projects and all kinds of things. So it just goes to show you sometimes you bring people together and, lives change all because of horse racing. And so anyway, Jeff, tell me a little bit about your background and horse racing, not necessarily just from Wasabi's case, but, how horse racing started for you and especially horse racing ownership. How did horse racing ownership start with you and that journey for you?
Yeah. So it's an interesting story. This goes into the category of be careful what you ask for. So in Baltimore, I still am a board member at the House of Ruth, Maryland. And there was another board member. I was at a board meeting. This was probably 8 years ago, and was having an innocent conversation. She asked me what I had done over the weekend. I told her I'd taken my daughter to the racetrack, and she said, "Oh, or do you like horse racing?" I'm like, "I love horse racing." And I said, "One day, I'd really like to own a racehorse." And I kind of thought that would be the end of the conversation. And next thing I know, she proceeds to tell me that that's what her husband does. To a large extent. So all of a sudden it went from, gee, one day I'd love to own a racehorse, to you should talk to my husband, to my going in with her husband and a trainer on my first horse. So I actually entered into horse racing at what would be in the Wasabi world, the grad level. So I went in owning 25% of horses with the owner and the trainer having the other piece of the horse.
Gotcha. And how did that first experience work for you?
Yeah. So I will say I'll give credit to the to my partner. He did talk to me before I gave him the money for the check. He came to me and he said, "Listen, if you think you're doing this as an investment and you're going to make money off of this, stop right now, because I don't want you in on this, and that's not why you should be doing this." And then he proceeded to tell me the old horse racing joke, which is, what's the quickest way to become a millionaire in horse racing? The answer is start with 2 million. So I laughed some of that stuff off, and I will tell you 8 years later, it's not quite as funny as it was then, because you do come to realize exactly what is entailed. Now, I will say, just the last thing I'll say is the interesting thing 8 years later, because you don't know on your first horse, right? So 8 years later, we actually ended up with a horse out of Outflanker who ended up winning 4 races. So, looking back now, I was a bit spoiled in the beginning, just by the level of success we had. So I think as I progressed on, I realized, it wasn't that easy. And then I realized all the things that happen in the horse racing game that delay the races or your horse's health. And that's, really where the money starts to pile up. And I know I'm telling you, TK, what you know beyond belief. So.
Yes, obviously. Thomas, tell us a little bit about your horse racing ownership journey.
Mine actually started when I was leaving Kentucky. I found a partnership group that allowed you to have 1% of broodmare or 1% of an active racing horse. And so I got into it and wasn't able to participate in any club activities like Wasabi has available because I was leaving the area. And it was one of the things that for me showed me that I never wanted to own a whole horse of my own because they were never competitive. And then moving to Ocala, eventually seeing some success with the people that I have acquaintances with and seeing at a higher level that you can be profitable and have horses that are elite, then I got reinterested and started a group of my own with some friends. And our first horse, kind of same example, was we were profitable in the first horse. And it was a situation where we won and got claimed out on the same race, which is always nice. And the subsequent horses were not profitable, but you feel a difference when you start increasing the ownership level and you see the actual vet bills coming in, the shipping costs of taking the horse to where they might be competitive. And it definitely changes the game when you start to see all the things that can happen and do eventually happen if you have enough horses.
Yep. Yeah. So both of you, but Thomas, I'll direct the question at you because I know this has been a big part of you. Talk to me a little bit, or talk to the group a little bit about you're a very active participant in our breeding programs. You're actually a graduate in our breeding programs, and our breeding programs are actually one of those things that's very unusual because there aren't a lot of breeding programs run sort of the way we do in the game. But talk to me a little bit about why you like the breeding side of the business and why and what you find interesting about sort of, both your experiences with us and not with us.
Yeah, I think that the breeding side, you always have that the hope that you're going to be a part of something that might be special. And every time that you try to line up a breeding match or have access to these options, which really it's hard to find. And that's what is unique with this program, because over the last really year at every auction, Wasabi is active in acquiring breed mares, and it gives you the opportunity to pick and choose and not only kind of get in on the one option that's available at the time. So you can pick and choose the different the pedigrees that you're interested in and have a chance to get out if you want to with either the individual foal offering or as a yearling, because with your program, you have the finite period of time that you may own it and then rejoin if you want to, as with the yearling or as a 2-year-old. And that gives you several chances of, rather than putting all your funds into one broodmare and being stuck with each foal, whether they turn out to be able to even race or not. And so I think having the 20% options with multiple horses, when you get to feel what the expenses are, so you know what you're getting into year after year, and you have the accelerated opportunities and the experiences that you have with having multiple offerings to see, again, the things that eventually do happen, and learning each step of the way with all those, with the foals that come to us.
Thanks. And those are things that I pride myself on, really, in sort of how I created those to give those people the options. Jeff, I'm not sure. Have you participated in any of the breeding side?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, both on the broodmare side and on a couple of the individual foals. And, the only thing, just like Thomas was saying, I think, again, the thing that I guess I have, and then I know Thomas does too, and TK, I know you see it, but the thing I think is the biggest perspective here, as I look at kind of what I'll call the wasabi world and the non-wasabi world, is really the kind of limited downside, right? The fact that you've structured a bunch of situations where, yes, you're going to have an upfront cost, right? And yes, that upfront cost is at risk in theory, right? Depending on what plays out. But what doesn't occur is the kind of continued risk that comes in. So I think Thomas said it perfectly. What I love about the individual foal offerings is you're taking a look right at the breeding, you're taking a look at the match, right? And then you're able to just attach yourself to that foal, and you're really able to give yourself upside with a very, very reasonable downside.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the individual foal. Jeff,
Yeah.
tell folks, switching gears a little bit, tell people the Cam story.
Oh, boy.
You know, and the Cam
Yeah.
story's big, and
It's big.
but you know, tell the Cam story a little bit from a
Yeah.
perspective of an owner, and considering the journey you've been on.
Yeah. So this will make you never want to own 100% of a racehorse. So you're welcome to everybody who's listening to this if you ever get tempted to own 100% of a racehorse. And I will also say that you also in horse racing, don't necessarily let your emotions help you make a decision. So the way I found TK is I owned a horse named Participate. I think those of you who know me, have been around, you know how emotionally attached I was to Participate. She won a race on Maryland Million Day, and then she got claimed away, and I was absolutely devastated. So I kept track of her, and then one day she shows up getting claimed by a group called Wasabi, and I just was like, who the hell are these guys, right? So I started doing some research, and actually that's how I got the TK, right? So I show up at Wasabi, I learn about the whole Wasabi program, I start buying, that you have to understand. On one side of my life, I show up at there and I'm like, wait a minute, you can buy 1% of a horse and you don't have any downside. I was like, you know what I mean? Like, where was that 7 years ago when I was first trying to break in? So I went from a graduate to this, and I was like, holy crap. But then I also got to go in on Participate. So here I am now back in on one of my favorite horses of all time as a broodmare. So she has her first offspring, and you can probably see where this is going emotionally. So she has her first offspring. She's paired up with Irish Warcry. It's going to be her first crop, his first crop. So I'm in, right? So I'm in on Participate, and we have this good looking colt that comes out. So I guess TK, I'm gonna guess it was no more than 4 or 5 months in. We had somebody come from the outside who wanted to buy the colt, nicknamed Cowboy, by the way, which was a very appropriate name at that point in his life. So we had somebody come in and want to buy. So it was the worst case scenario for a person like me, because it was either I had to either commit to TK that I was going to buy him, or we were going to sell him away. So first lesson is you probably don't want to buy a horse when it's only 4 months old, because that's when the bill starts. So your best case scenario is 2 years, right? Okay. So, but it's Participate. It's her first baby. There's no way I can let this happen. So I purchased the Cowboy at about 4 or 5 months old. And that's really my first entry into ever owning a full racehorse. So I knew nothing about it, right? I mean, I always had other people to take care of everything. So I didn't know about the fact that, you have to think through a strategy of where you're going to keep the horse in the first year of its life so that you can get certification. So just an amazing learning experience. A big shout out to George Adams and the whole team for helping me think about how to get my horse Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia certified. So that first period, you're really just kind of, the horse is growing, and you're kind of making sure they're in the right places for the certifications, and then you're gearing up really for them to go to the track in year 2. So, all good. He's growing like crazy. In fact, he's literally growing like crazy. So he's just this gigantic horse. If any of you have seen Participate, she's a very big horse. Irish War Cry obviously was a big horse. So this horse just starts growing and growing and growing. So we get to the 2-year-old year, send him down with Zoe, and he starts in and starts to progress. But honestly, he keeps growing, right? He just keeps growing. So there's a risk in continuing to run him when they're still growing, as you probably know, especially on the front legs. So it started as a cycle of just stops and starts. So then we get to the point where we're going, and now the horse is named Camulus, by the way, which is the the Celtic god of war. So now he is Camulus. He's 2 years old. He's with Jesse. And once again, he goes into this, and TK was there, right? He goes into this great training spurt, and he's running all over the track, and he's looking good. And at one point, Jesse called me and said, listen, had the front legs x-rayed. His growth plates are still open. We got to slow down. So here I am once again. I got this big, beautiful horse that looks fantastic, except he's not on the track and he's not training, right? So the clock's ticking about how far he is away from a race. The money's still piling up because guess what? The bills are still the bills, right? No matter how good he looks. And so, get through that period, go back into training, and then the dreaded 2-year-old, I would say, the dreaded 2 to 3-year-old thing happens, which is the next call is he's got a little bit of a chip in the front, right? So now we have to stop training and go do a quick little surgery, which then just sets the clock back another 60 days at least, right, before he's even back in. So I guess this is just a long way of telling you right now that I am essentially 3 years into this, and I have a horse that is fantastically beautiful and who I think everyone believes has potential. But that horse, as hard as it for me to say this, that horse will, without an absolute miracle, that horse will not get on the track at 3 years old. So you're talking about carrying a horse for 3.5 years before they get to a race. So, that is the story, right? And that is the thing. Now, hopefully this horse will start racing at 4 and he'll win every race he's ever in. And I'll be sitting back laughing about this. But, what I have learned more than anything else is how delicate this is, especially in the younger horses, how overwhelmingly expensive it is, even when things are going right. And then what happens when you have these kind of setbacks. And it's really 2 things, right? It's time and money, right? It's really hard to sit back and just wait and wait and wait and wait. And then it's very expensive to sit back and wait and wait. So this has been a very eye-opening first experience for me. I don't regret it. But it definitely is teaching me all of the pitfalls that you have to be willing to take as an owner.
Yeah. I will tell you all that and Jeff will back me up on this, I tried to talk him out of doing this. When the offer came for Cam, he was called Cowboy at the time. I felt, first of all, knowing his affinity for the horse, I had to give him a call before I just sold the horse. But by the way, I've done that with other club members on particular horses as well, where I know, one, they had the financial means to be a full owner, and 2, I know they have an emotional attachment to a horse. So I will pick up the phone and say, listen, we're selling this horse because we have an offer, but I want you to at least know about it in case you want to do something about that instead. And I told Jeff on that phone call, I would not do this if I were you. I don't think it's a good idea. And he said, let me talk to my wife. And the next thing you know, next day he's doing it. So I just want to go on the record that there was no
Yep, that
TK
is
strong
correct.
arm. If there was anything, there was a TK, get the hell out of this, Jeff. You don't want to do this. So
Yes,
just to be
that is
fair.
correct. That is
So-
correct.
So Thomas, I did a quick look while I was while Jeff was talking. Your graduate level with us is with 4 broodmares, especially 3 of the what I'll call the newer batch, for lack of a, the sort of our new movement as we continue to go sort of upstack here. What moved you really to be a graduate on a broodmare and make that step? What was the movement? You talked about the greatness of the individual foal program, which is awesome. How did you mentally think about saying, I want to commit so much because I'm committing years to being a broodmare owner? When you commit to a broodmare owner, it's measured in years. It's not hours. It's not going to get claimed in one race. You're going to be
Right.
there for years. How did you think about that?
Right. I think that a lot of it stems from participating in the stallion offerings as well, and seeing how those marry together and create almost a mini version of what you're creating, and seeing the trajectory that you are on with Wasabi, and being part of that on every level that I can be, as well as also I've never been good at paper trading. I need to be involved financially so that I feel those losses, feel the gains, and feel what it is to have the full responsibility, and spreading that out over 4 or 5 rather than having one on my own at this time, because I would like to do that on my own for more of a hobby for my kids to experience. And that's kind of why I've purchased the place that we're building on and going to move into hopefully in a few months. And so seeing the different matches, having the experience with the stallions as well as the broodmares, gives me kind of a more rapid education, because I pay more attention by being a graduate and seeing those things, pay more attention to what's happening with each horse, and having, rather than just one experience at a time, having multiple to enhance the speed of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about that. I only on the breeding side do I talk about this, but I always, and on the racing side, when I talk about it, I always put it all in quotes because it's a dangerous term. Because I try not to talk about most of the horse business as investments, but in my mind, I think of it as a portfolio. And what I tell someone when they join us, do a portfolio of stuff. Do one individual, if you've got the money, figure out whatever your own personal budget is. I have no idea what that is. You do, think of your entertainment budget, but build a portfolio. Buy 1% of an individual foal so you can watch that experience and have that emotion that goes with that and how that acts out. Buy 1% of a claimer, and be a part of that to get that quick action. Buy 1% of a yearling and watch that yearling grow up and see what that looks like over the next couple of years. And think of it as a portfolio of entertainment, not investment, but a portfolio of entertainment. That's what I always try. And it's interesting because that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like, I could put all my eggs into one broodmare and I pick it. And we've got people on this call who, I see Mark Erlinson's on here, and he's a graduate with us, and he has his own broodmares as well. And that's great. But for a lot of people, having the ability to have a whole portfolio of broodmares or aspects of broodmares is not possible, right? It's a large financial commitment to make that kind of commitment, especially all on your own. So I do think that's one of the great advantages, and that portfolio mentality is that kind of what you're thinking when you describe it?
Exactly.
Yeah. If you were, and I was looking to your I think you're about maybe 2 years in, and this one's a good, interesting one for you to talk about, Thomas. You were in Yes She Will as a graduate, And that particular mare started off as an inauspicious type of situation that was financially advantageous in many ways. Just from but if you want to tell the story real quick, and I think people will find that interesting.
Yeah, and so the offering came from when she was in foal at auction, and then shortly after the sale, she lost the foal, and with that, you think, well, now we're 1 or 2 years away from potentially having another foal. But George and I'm sure you were involved with making the decision to go ahead and insure her, and so most of that money was kind of reclaimed through the insurance payout for that. So that helped us get through to the next time that she was, bred to she's been bred twice now to Rock Your World. And has an exciting foal already. And yes, that was the first graduate horse. Although in the old program I did do Ride the Tide, and so the education level changes. At first, okay, we're looking at who's the broodmare sire. That's important, but then you see all these other things, and as you and George lay out in the discussions and the education parts. What about the other family members that are coming to there, as far as what runners do we have? Just like Disarm, we've talked a lot about that on the discussion pages of how that adds value to the broodmare. And those are things that I would have never looked at on my own. It would just be, okay, how did the horse do as the racing career? Who's the broodmare sire? What's the pedigree? Nothing as far as looking forward to the future family. And those are things that I've been able to learn and take from and being in these offerings and in the discussion boards with all the different channels that you have available. And also getting some of that from the stallion funds as well.
Yeah. I think that's it's a big point. And I think one of the things that I love about our graduate program is that it gives people the chance to sort of have that deeper connection, really understand ownership. They get listed as an owner, or all of those things. But the little subtlety is that when you do it in the grad program, we're still there to sort of advise. So like that, yes, she will in full. We know sort of from our own experiences and what we try to bring to the table from a management standpoint, we know that anytime we buy a mare in foal at an auction, we insure that foal to the max that we can, because often the stress of an auction makes that horse makes her slip, right? And so in this case, we knew to do that, and you never want to lose a foal. No one wants to, obviously, but from a financial standpoint, it actually worked out because we got the mare almost for free, is what happened from that transaction. So it was fortuitous from a financial standpoint, if not from a business standpoint or a human or a life standpoint. So but yeah, no, that's good stuff. Jeff, we got a question that came in for you. What were the yearly costs for that Participate colt? I know it's been pretty variable, but if you just want to ballpark it for the last.
Actually I went, and it's funny, Laura asked a great question, and I actually went and grabbed some information from 2021, because that's when he would have been that colt, right? So Laura, the answer is to that part, the yearly cost. It starts out very reasonable, right? Because the reality is when you buy him as young as I did, then he's with his mom for a while, right? So you're paying very, very little money. I would say once he's weaned and it's time for him to go kind of on his own. For instance, I sent him up to Delaware for a couple months. So when he's up in Delaware, so this is probably January of 21. So that was probably somewhere around $900 to $1,000. So you kind of kick up to that 900 or 1,000, and then When you get to Zoe, right, you're now looking at something closer to $2,000. Maybe a little bit more
A little bit
through
more,
that period
probably.
of time,
Yeah.
probably a little bit more than that. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
depending on some of the times, it's probably closer to what, 2,800.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Probably gets up to 2,800, and then of course once you get to the racetrack, right, you're paying the day rate, which with everything else goes on is over $3,000 a month. So it's pretty reasonable for the first year, right? And that's why you're kind of like, oh, this isn't so bad, right? And then second year comes and you're like, whoa, hello. And then, then the second year progresses to the training and you're like, uh-oh, I see what's about to happen. And then you get to, to the track. And then that's when the full expense comes on. So that, it really is that escalator depending on the age, which, I don't want to steal the thunder from the other question, but, I think if nothing else you've heard from me, from me and my story is, to me, the ideal situation is to buy your 100% horse as late as you can, preferably when they're a 2-year-old. And right about, at that point, you kind of know what you've got physically. And at that point, you want to kind of pick them up when they're going to be headed to the track. Because at least at that point, you're starting to spend money, but they're already working towards a race versus the journey that I went on. Now, again, listen, the pictures, the memories I have of watching him grow up from the beginning, like, again, I don't trade all that, but I think, if you're trying to come in to own, I think the temptation would be like TK tried to convince me is, you don't necessarily want to go in that early. You want to let some of that happen and then figure out if it's the right purchase.
Yeah. And the trade-off, Laura, for your second question too, just as you think about it, is the trade-off there is that almost always you can buy a weanling for less than you can buy a yearling. And that's usually less than you can buy a 2-year-old if everything else is constant, because who's ever selling that horse is figuring that in. So there's a little risk reward there along the lines, but not that you can't spend $1 million on a yearling either. But if you keep everything constant, you're going to pay for that time one way or the other. If you're buying equal value all the way through. It's you'd have to look for bargains otherwise. Jeff, we didn't talk about this, and actually I think this is actually a good question for both of you. I'll start with you, Jeff, since I said your name, but what's the thing that you like the most about being a full thoroughbred owner? What is the most appealing piece?
I think the most appealing piece is being involved in every decision, right? And let me start back. For me, the best piece, especially with the Cameo story, has been the education, right? Just now understanding exactly what happens from birth all the way out, and then being really a part of those decisions, right? I mean, making the decision on naming the horse, and not that I didn't name other horses, but not with the same level of conviction when it's on your own. So I think seeing the progression, learning the process, and then just the attachment and the desire to see him succeed. It's just a very unique opportunity to create a bond with a horse, I think, that's different in any other way. But the education and learning and decision-making and communication, with the trainers and kind of watching the journey, I think has been the best part for me.
How about you, Thomas?
I completely agree. The education and seeing, I mean, it's super exciting to come up with a name and get it accepted and see that in the program. And then just the excitement of even knowing the horse worked out and is entered for a race. And I still feel like that I'm probably going to die from some sort of abnormal palpitations during a race, seeing my horse come around there and hopefully going to win. But the education is still, it's so much more intense, and the value that you get when you have that invested in the time, the money, and just the emotions surrounding that. I think is by far the most important and valuable in doing that.
Yeah.
Yep. And TK, if I can throw in another thing real fast.
Yeah,
I think the
yeah.
other real cool thing about owning a horse on your own is, that idea of creating your own stable name, right? That's going to be the only name listed in the program, right? Now, again, that right has cost me more money than I ever dreamed. But anyway, but the other piece, which we talk about a lot, even in the grad program, is creating the stable name and then creating your silks. And I will say that day that your silks arrive from Speed Silks, is just a great moment, right? Because it's yours. You designed the silks; they're yours. And I just think, seeing the silks on, especially when it's going to be your horse and the only name in the program is the owner and the silks, that's a pretty cool moment.
Yeah, I think it's one of the other things that's pretty cool. It causes me a lot of headache, because rotating the
Nobody
silks
knows
through,
how much of a headache that is for you. I do,
yeah,
but not it is a
rotating the
headache.
silks through so that grad owners get to use their silks, and it's not just the Wasabi, and it's got to rotate through. And I can't begin to tell you the amount of headaches that I have to do. So the silks is, and just to get that, but I tell you, Mark Bateman, who's not on the call, but who's been a great graduate for us, his excitement when the horse won and had his silks on, just listening to his excitement about that was worth all the headache I got to do just to make that happen, candidly. The other thing that you all don't realize is the amount of paperwork I have to do on every single time we have a horse that is a graduate horse. If there are graduates in on a horse in the state of Pennsylvania, I have to spend $75 and do 5 pieces of paperwork just to have that horse run. Every time it runs, I have to deal with that in the state of Pennsylvania. So, because they have strange laws about partnerships. So it's not easy to do the graduate from my piece, but I think it's extremely important to the game and extremely important for the graduation of people who want to make that step or can make that step. Not everybody can, and that's okay. That's why we have a variety of programs. But for people that want to, I go that just to try to get through that. As we we're coming up on 45 minutes, and I really appreciate your guys' time. I have one last question for both of you to kind of sort of, put a bow on things. If you were advising the earlier self of you before you became either a graduate or an owner on your own right, what would be the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self that absolutely 100% now that you didn't know then? I'll start with you, Jeff.
I think probably for me, it would be a little more of enjoy the journey. You know what I mean? Don't focus only on the races and the results. Focus on the journey and the ability to build a relationship with the trainer and the horse. So I think, I would characterize normally as a very impatient person, right? So I would go in and I'm already thinking about results and I'm already thinking about it. And a lot of times I just don't take the chance to kind of enjoy each step of the journey and really just, it's like everything else in life, right? It's really fascinating. Here comes this little foal who somehow just grows up and understands completely how to run around a track, and wants to do it for a living. So I think that's kind of one piece. And then I would say the other thing for me is I would go in now, I know, but I would go in with a very strong plan for aftercare from the very beginning, right? Start thinking about the horse's complete future, not just when they're racing. Like what are the options going to be? Because you never know, right? As we've all been through with any of the horses on our own or through Wasabi, at any moment, right? That racing career can be over and you still have this horse. And remember, these horses are, 3 years old, 4 years old. They have a lot of life left. So I think the other big thing for me that I would tell myself is don't think of this as a racehorse. Think of this as a horse whose current job is racing, but could do so many other things. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with Ann Merriman in Maryland when I first got into racing, and she was the trainer. And Ann has a farm full of horses that used to race that she just takes and does amazing things with in terms of show horses, jumpers, hunters, fox horse. I mean, you just won't know. So, I think it's enjoy the journey. And I think it's understand that it's a, at least for me, because obviously I'm a sucker, it's a lifelong commitment, right? For that horse's life. You don't own it while it's a racehorse, especially if it's yours, right? You don't own it as a racehorse, you own it. So just enjoy the journey and patience and understanding that it's a commitment to make sure that that horse is going to be in the right hands while it's racing, and then in the right hands when it finishes.
That's very good. Thomas, how about you?
Yeah, I think it centers on expectations, and the expectations are that you can't set a schedule and expect that it's going to follow when you think you're going to have 4 workouts and then have a start. It just doesn't work that way, and you never know when an injury or something's going to happen, or your race scratches, and to be open and flexible with what happens with the horse and protect the horse. And the expectation of successful owners and trainers, that winning percentage is pretty low in perspective. So you don't expect that you're going to win half the races or 30% of the races. It just doesn't happen, even when you're trying to enter them in competitive races, because everybody else is trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And sentiment of aftercare as far as having other options when they do stop racing.
And TK, if I could jump back in, there's another thing that I really thought about, and I can't say this enough about Jesse. The other thing that I know now that I would have told my younger self is, and I was lucky because I started with Ann Merriman, but the trainer matters, right? And not every trainer is the kind of person that you want to put your horse with, even if it wins. So I guess the other thing I would tell my younger self is, you need to spend time. Picking a trainer is like picking everything else. There needs to be due diligence. You need to understand, and then you need to be a part of it, and you need to be present, and you need to understand what's happening to your horse, and you need to ask questions. And it isn't a situation where you just give it to the trainer and then hope everything's okay. So the trainer matters, the ethics of the trainer, the reputation of the trainer. So that's the other thing is, I would tell myself to do the due diligence up front before you just give a horse.
Yeah, I think that is, having lived it myself, those first couple of years, I had 4 or 5 trainers that I was trying out. Some big names, small names, no names, everything. You live and learn, and spending time with it is all that important. It's the trainer and where you house the horse on the breeding side is just as important. It's not by accident, and it's taken 7 years and candidly millions of dollars of my money to get us to kind of where we are at this point. It's and we're still a long way to go. So don't ask me how many more millions it's going to take, but for now it's single digits millions. So we're doing well. Anyway, thanks. Thanks guys for the time tonight. It was really wonderful. I really super appreciate both of you coming tonight, but even more than that, both of you being on our journey. You've been integral parts of the Wasabi story and the journey, and it's especially wonderful knowing that you had horse racing experiences before you joined us. And you're going to continue to have them even after us, which is, I find wonderful for the game and wonderful for us. So I thank you both for tonight, and I hope the crowd enjoyed it. And I'll see you all on Slack.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, everybody.